The sun rose over London on a special Saturday morning. It was May 6, 2023. This was not just any day. It was the day King Charles would be crowned. The whole city was happy and excited. Flags hung from buildings. People lined the streets early. Some had waited all night to get good spots. They'd brought small chairs, blankets, and hot tea in thermoses. Many wore clothes with the British flag. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to see better. Inside Kensington Palace, the alarm clock rang at 5:00 a.m. Prince William woke up first. He felt both happy and serious. Today, his father would become the King of England officially. William knew that one day he would follow the same path. William looked out the window. He could see police cars and security people getting ready. He thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth I, who had died last year. She had been queen for 70 years. Now things were changing. Kate woke up soon after. She checked her phone. There were many messages wishing the family good luck. She smiled and put the phone down. Today was about family, duty, and history. "Are you ready?" she asked William. "As ready as I can be," he said. "How about you?" Kate nodded. "The children's outfits are all prepared. I hope Louis behaves today." They both smiled, thinking of their youngest son. Prince Louis was only 5 years old. At the last big royal event, he had made funny faces that people all over the world loved. The royal helpers came in with breakfast. There was toast, eggs, and fruit. The family needed to eat well. It would be a long day with no breaks for food. Soon, the children woke up too. Prince George, who was 9, was quiet and thoughtful. Princess Charlotte, who was 8, was excited and kept asking questions. Little Prince Louis just wanted to play with his toys, not understanding why today was special. "Do I really have to wear this?" Louis asked, pointing at his fancy outfit laid out on his bed. "Yes, darling," Kate said. "Everyone will be dressed up today. It's a very important day for Grandpa." "Will there be a party after?" Charlotte asked. She loved celebrations. "Yes, but first there is the long ceremony," William explained. "Remember how we practiced? You need to sit still and be quiet." "Like at school," George said. He was the oldest and understood best. The family got dressed with help from their staff. William wore his military uniform with many medals. It was heavy and warm, but he stood tall and proud. Kate wore a beautiful white dress with flowers sewn on it. On her head was a special headpiece with diamonds. She looked like a princess from a storybook. The children wore matching outfits in the royal colors. Charlotte had a small tiara, which made her feel very grown up. George wore a suit like his father's. Louis had a small version that made him look cute. "Time for hair and makeup," an assistant said to Kate. While Kate got ready, William talked to his children. "Today is a day you will remember all your lives," he said. "Grandpa is becoming king, just like Granny was queen. One day, long from now, it will be my turn. And then, George, it will be yours." George looked serious. Louis was playing with his shoes. Charlotte was watching a bird outside the window. William smiled. They were still just children, even on this big day. Outside, the crowds grew bigger. TV cameras were everywhere. Reporters talked about the royal family. People from all over the world watched on screens. In just a few hours, the family would leave for Westminster Abbey. Their car was being prepared. Security checked everything twice. Inside the palace, the Wales family finished getting ready for their place in history. The big clock in the palace showed 7:30 a.m. Breakfast was over. The family had 2 more hours before they needed to leave. Outside, rain fell softly, but weather people said it would stop soon. "Time for final checks," said the chief helper. She had a list on her clipboard. She had worked with the royal family for many years. Today was extra busy. In the large mirror, William checked his uniform again. Every button had to shine. Every medal had to be in the right place. This was how things were done in the royal family. Small details mattered. "Daddy, you look like a soldier in a movie," said Charlotte. She stood next to him, looking at their reflection. Her white dress had small flowers on it, just like her mother's. William smiled at her. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look very pretty too." In another room, Kate was helping Louis with his clothes. The young prince did not like his tight collar. "It itches," he complained, trying to pull it loose. "I know, darling, but it's just for a few hours," Kate said. She fixed his collar again. "Remember, many people will take pictures today." Louis made a face. "I don't like pictures." Kate laughed. "I know that too." George sat quietly on a chair, reading a small book about coronations. He wanted to understand everything that would happen today. Sometimes George worried about being king someday, but not today. Today was about his grandfather. "Mum," he called, "will I have to bow to grandfather now?" Kate came over and sat next to him. "Yes, in the ceremony. He's still your grandfather, but now he's also our king." George nodded, thinking hard about this. At 8:15 a.m., the family gathered in the main room. Helpers brought them water and small snacks. Once they left for the Abbey, there would be no eating until after the ceremony. William's phone rang. It was his father calling from Buckingham Palace. "Father," William said, "how are you feeling?" The others could not hear what King Charles said, but William smiled. "Yes, we're all ready. The children are excited." He paused. "It's a big day, but you're ready for it. We'll see you there." After hanging up, William looked at his family. "Grandfather sends his love. He's a bit nervous." "Kings get nervous too?" asked Charlotte with big eyes. "Everyone gets nervous on important days," Kate explained. At 9:00 a.m., the palace doors opened. Outside, 6 black cars waited. Rain had stopped, and the sun was trying to come out. Security people stood everywhere, watching carefully. "Time to go," said William. The family walked out together. Cameras flashed from far away. The children held their parents' hands. They had practiced this walk many times. They got into the second car. The first car had security people. The other cars had helpers and more security. As they drove through London streets, people waved and cheered. Police had blocked roads so they could pass easily. The children looked out the windows, amazed by how many people had come. "Look at all the flags," Louis said, pointing. The car moved slowly through the crowds. Some people had camped overnight to see the royal family pass by. They took pictures with their phones and waved small British flags. Inside the car, Kate checked the children one last time. She fixed Charlotte's hair and straightened George's tie. Louis was pressing his face against the window, making marks. "Louis, sit properly, please," Kate said gently. William looked at his watch. They were on time. The coronation would start at 11:00 a.m., but they needed to arrive early. Many important people from around the world would be there. "Almost there," he said as Westminster Abbey came into view. The large church was over 1,000 years old. Many kings and queens had been crowned there. Now it was Charles's turn. The car slowed down. They could see the huge crowd outside the Abbey. Soldiers stood in perfect lines. Their bright red uniforms and tall black hats made them easy to see. "Remember what we practiced," Kate told the children. "Walk slowly, smile, and stay together." The car stopped. A man in a fancy uniform opened the door. The time had come. William stepped out first, then turned to help his family. Loud cheers filled the air. Bells rang from the Abbey Tower. The Wales family stood together for a moment, taking a deep breath before walking toward the ancient doors of Westminster Abbey. The family stood at the entrance of Westminster Abbey. The big wooden doors were open wide. Inside, they could see rows and rows of seats. Most were already filled with people in fancy clothes. The walls of the old church were very high. Colorful glass windows let in soft light. "Stay close," William whispered to the children. A man in a black suit came to meet them. He had a list in his hands. "Your Royal Highnesses, please follow me." The man led them down the long middle path. This path is called the aisle. It had a red carpet. On both sides, people stood up when they saw William and his family. They bowed their heads as the Wales family passed. Lewis looked around with wide eyes. He had never seen so many important people in one place. Kings and queens from other countries sat in special seats. Movie stars and singers were there too. Even the Prime Minister was sitting near the front. "Mummy, I see Uncle Harry," Charlotte whispered, pointing discreetly. Kate nodded, but kept walking. Today was not a day for family talks. It was a day for ceremony. The inside of Westminster Abbey was decorated with flowers from all parts of Britain. Red roses, white lilies, and blue flowers made the colors of the British flag. The sweet smell filled the air. Music played softly. A large group of singers called a chorus stood ready to sing when the king arrived. Men in white robes moved around, getting things ready for the ceremony. The family reached their seats at the front. They were on the right side, very close to where King Charles would sit. William helped Kate with her dress as she sat down. The children sat between their parents. "Remember," Kate said to Lewis, "we have to be very quiet now." Lewis nodded, but his eyes were already looking at everything. There was so much to see. The golden throne, the big crown sitting on a pillow, the jeweled sword and staff. George leaned toward his father. "That's the crown of Street Edward, right? The one from the book." William nodded, proud that his son had been studying. "Yes, it's very old and heavy. Grandfather will only wear it for a short time." Charlotte sat very straight, trying to look proper. She wanted to be just like her mother. Kate gave her a small smile of approval. More guests arrived. Each time, everyone turned to look. Many women wore big hats with feathers. Men wore suits with medals or military uniforms like William. The minutes ticked by. The ceremony would start soon. William checked his watch. His father would be arriving any moment. A small boy behind them dropped his program book. Lewis turned around to look, and then started to giggle. Kate gently touched his arm as a reminder to be quiet. The large organs in the church started to play louder music. This was a sign that King Charles was on his way. Everyone in the abbey sat up straighter. William felt a mix of feelings. He was happy for his father. He was proud to be part of this old tradition. But he also missed his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. She had been queen for so long. This was the first coronation in 70 years. "It's starting," he whispered to his family. The doors at the back of the abbey opened wide. Everyone stood up. Even the children got to their feet, standing on their tiptoes to see better. First came people carrying flags, then priests in white and gold robes, then important helpers of the king. Each group walked slowly down the aisle. Kate bent down to Lewis. "Remember when we practiced what to do when grandfather comes in?" Lewis nodded, his face suddenly serious. He knew this was important. The music got even louder. Trumpets joined in with a bright, clear sound. The choir began to sing a very old song. It was the same song that had played at coronations for hundreds of years. Then, at the door, King Charles appeared. He wore a long red robe with white fur trim. It was so long that helpers had to carry the end of it. On his head was a small golden crown, not the main one yet. That would come during the ceremony. William took a deep breath. The coronation was about to begin. His father was walking toward them, toward history, toward the crown that would make him King Charles II. The Wales family stood tall and proud as their grandfather, father, and king entered Westminster Abbey. Everyone watched as King Charles walked slowly down the aisle. His face was serious. He looked straight ahead. Behind him, Queen Camilla followed in her own beautiful white dress. The Wales family stood still as King Charles passed them. William and George bowed their heads. Kate and Charlotte did small curtsies, bending their knees. Even Lewis remembered to bow, though he peeked up quickly to see his grandfather. King Charles gave them a small nod. His eyes met William's for a second. In that look was a message only a father and son could understand. This was more than just a king and his heir. This was family. When King Charles reached the front of the abbey, he sat on a wooden chair. This chair was very old. It had been used in coronations for hundreds of years. Under it was a special stone called the Stone of Scone. This stone came from Scotland. The Wales family sat down again. The real ceremony was about to begin. It would last for 2 hours. That was a long time for children to sit still. Kate had brought small books for the children to look at if they got bored. She had also packed tiny snacks in her purse. These were things that good mothers think about. The Archbishop of Canterbury, the most important church leader in England, stood in front of King Charles. He wore white and gold robes. He would lead most of the ceremony. First came many prayers. The Archbishop asked God to bless King Charles. Then leaders from other religions said prayers too. This showed that the king was for all people in Britain, not just one religion. Louis started to fidget in his seat. He swung his legs back and forth. Kate gently put her hand on his knee to remind him to be still. Next came a special part where the king promised to be fair and good to all his people. He had to say many old words that kings had said for centuries. The words grandfather is saying are promises. William whispered to George, "One day I will say them, and then far in the future you will too." George nodded. He watched his grandfather carefully. After the promises, church music filled the abbey. The choir sang beautiful songs. Their voices went up to the high ceiling and seemed to float there. Charlotte loved music. She closed her eyes to listen better. Kate noticed and smiled at her daughter's enjoyment. Then came a very important moment. The Archbishop put holy oil on King Charles's hands, chest, and head. This oil was specially made with roses, orange flowers, jasmine, and cinnamon. It smelled sweet and strong. Louis wrinkled his nose. He could smell the oil from where he sat. "It smells like Grandma's perfume," he whispered, a bit too loudly. People nearby heard and smiled. Kate put her finger to her lips, but her eyes were kind. It was hard for a 5-year-old to be quiet for so long. Now the most important part was coming. A helper brought the crown of Street Edward on a pillow. This crown was very heavy. It was made of solid gold and had many jewels. It was over 300 years old. William felt his heart beat faster. This was the moment that would make his father officially the king. He reached for Kate's hand and held it tight. The abbey became very quiet. Everyone watched as the Archbishop lifted the crown high in the air. The gold caught the light from the windows. For a moment, it seemed to glow. Then, slowly and carefully, the Archbishop placed the crown on King Charles's head. "God save the king," the Archbishop called out. "God save the king." Everyone in the abbey repeated loudly. Louis was so surprised by the sudden noise that he jumped in his seat. George and Charlotte said the words too, their voices joining hundreds of others. William felt a lump in his throat. His father was now truly King Charles II. This was history happening right in front of his eyes. Someday, it would be his turn to sit in that chair. But today, he was simply a proud son. The trumpets began to play. The choir sang. Westminster Abbey filled with music and joy. The coronation had reached its most important moment. After the crown was placed on King Charles's head, the ceremony continued. Now it was time for special people to give gifts to the new king. These gifts were not like birthday presents. They were old and important objects that stood for the king's power and duty. First came a man carrying a big golden ball with a cross on top. This was called the orb. It showed that the king's power came from God. The king held it for a minute, then gave it back. Next came a golden stick called the scepter. This showed the king's right to rule. King Charles held this in his right hand. William watched his father sit very straight on the throne. The crown looked heavy, but King Charles did not show any discomfort. This was what kings had to do, be strong even when things were hard. Louis was getting restless again. The ceremony had been going on for more than an hour now. He started to swing his legs and look around. Kate took out a small book from her purse and gave it to him. It had pictures of cars, Louis's favorite thing. "Just a bit longer," she whispered to him. Charlotte sat very still. She was watching Queen Camilla, who now had her own smaller crown. Charlotte thought it was very pretty, with diamonds that sparkled in the light. George was paying close attention to everything. He knew he would need to remember all this. His father leaned over and pointed out different people in the ceremony, explaining their jobs in a quiet voice. Now it was time for the most important people to come and bow to the new king. This was called paying homage. First came church leaders in their special robes. They knelt in front of King Charles and promised to serve him. Then came the moment William had been preparing for. As the Prince of Wales and heir to the throne, he had a special part in the ceremony. He had to be the first royal family member to kneel before the king. William stood up from his seat. Kate gave his hand a quick squeeze for support. The children watched with big eyes as their father walked to the throne where King Charles sat. The whole abbey was quiet. Everyone watched as William approached his father. When he reached the throne, he bowed deeply. Then he knelt on one knee. This was an old tradition going back many hundreds of years. William placed his hands between his father's hands. Then he said special words in a clear, strong voice that everyone could hear. "I, William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, my king and my father. I will be your faithful servant and support you in all things, with God as my witness." These were not the exact old words from long ago. William had added, "and my father," to the usual promise. This was his way of showing that this was not just about a prince and a king. This was also about a son and his father. King Charles looked at his son. For a moment, the serious face of the king softened. There was love in his eyes. He nodded to William. William stood up and did something that was not in the old rules. He leaned forward and kissed his father on the cheek. This small act made many people in the abbey feel emotional. It showed that even kings and princes were also just people with families they loved. As William walked back to his seat, he felt proud. He had done his part well. His children were watching him with new eyes. They had seen their father show both respect for tradition and love for family. Kate smiled at him as he sat down. She knew how important this moment had been for him. "You did great, Daddy," Charlotte whispered. Louis, who had been quietly looking at his book, now looked up. He had noticed something was important, even if he didn't understand all of it. "Will I have to do that too?" George asked quietly. "Not for a very long time," William answered. "Today is Grandfather's Day, and one very far-off day will be my day. And then, much, much later, it will be your turn." George nodded, taking in his father's words. The ceremony continued with more prayers and songs. But for the Wales family, the most important part was done. They had played their role in history. After William returned to his seat, the ceremony moved on. Now it was time for Holy Communion. This is a special church service where people eat a small piece of bread and drink a sip of wine. King Charles went to a golden table called an altar for this part. While this was happening, Louis began to yawn. It was now almost 2 hours since the ceremony had started. That was a long time for a 5-year-old boy to sit still. He leaned against Kate's arm, his eyes starting to close. "Is he falling asleep?" Charlotte whispered, looking at her little brother. Kate nodded with a small smile. It's been a long day for him. Louis wasn't the only one getting tired. All around the abbey, people were shifting in their seats. Even some of the older guests looked ready for the ceremony to end, but everyone tried to stay respectful and quiet. George watched as the Archbishop gave King Charles the bread and wine. He had many questions about what everything meant, but he knew he had to wait until later to ask them. William felt proud of how well his children were behaving. Even Louis had done better than expected. William remembered his own grandmother's coronation. He wasn't born then, but he had watched videos of it. His father had been just 4 years old at that ceremony, even younger than Louis was now. The choir began to sing another beautiful song. The music filled the huge space of Westminster Abbey. Charlotte sat up straighter, enjoying the voices that seemed to float up to the high ceiling. "That's Handel's Zadok the Priest," William whispered to her. "It's been played at every coronation since 1727. Charlotte nodded, impressed by how old the song was. Now King Charles stood up. The heavy crown was still on his head. He walked to a special chair called the throne. This chair was covered in gold and had lions on the armrests. When the king sat on this chair, it meant he was fully the King of England. "That's it," William said quietly to his family. "Grandfather is now officially the king." Kate reached over and squeezed his hand. She knew this was both a happy and a serious moment for him. His father was king, which meant William was now one step closer to becoming king himself someday. Louis, who had been dozing, suddenly woke up. He saw King Charles sitting on the golden throne, and his eyes went wide. "Is it over?" he asked, a bit too loudly. People nearby smiled. Even in this serious ceremony, the honest question of a child was refreshing. "Almost," Kate told him quietly. "Just a little longer." The archbishop stood in front of King Charles and said more prayers. Then all the important church people lined up to bow to the king. After that, the royal family members who were there also came to bow or curtsy. When it was done, trumpets played again. The sound was bright and happy. It filled the abbey with joy. This told everyone that the main part of the ceremony was over. Now King Charles would leave the abbey wearing his crown and carrying the royal objects. The doors at the end of the abbey opened wide. Sunlight streamed in, making a bright path down the aisle. King Charles stood up. Queen Camilla stood beside him. They would walk out together. Everyone in the abbey stood up too. The Wales family got to their feet. Even Louis stood tall now, knowing something important was happening. King Charles and Queen Camilla started to walk down the aisle. They moved slowly because the king's robes were heavy and long. Several helpers carried the end of the robe so it wouldn't drag on the floor. As the king passed the Wales family, he gave them a special look. It wasn't just the look of a king to his subjects. It was the look of a father and grandfather to his family. William nodded back, showing his support and love. The choir sang as King Charles walked out of the abbey. The ceremony that had taken years to plan was almost over. King Charles II was now truly the king of the United Kingdom. "What happens now?" George asked his father. "Now we follow grandfather outside," William explained. "Then there will be a parade back to Buckingham Palace." After King Charles and Queen Camilla left Westminster Abbey, it was time for the other guests to leave too. They had to go in a special order. The most important people went first. The Wales family waited for their turn. They would be among the last to leave the abbey because they were so close to the king. While they waited, Kate helped Louis fix his clothes. The little prince had gotten wrinkled from sitting for so long. "Can we have lunch soon?" Louis asked. His tummy was making hungry noises. "Yes, soon," Kate promised. "There will be food at the palace." Charlotte was watching the other guests leave. She liked looking at the ladies' fancy dresses and big hats. Some hats had feathers and flowers on them. "Which hat do you like best?" William asked her, seeing where she was looking. Charlotte pointed to a lady in a bright blue hat. "That one. It looks like a bird." William smiled. Charlotte had always loved pretty things. George stood tall beside his father. He was trying to act grown up. He had watched everything carefully during the ceremony. Now he was thinking about what he had seen. "Dad," he said quietly, "when you become king, will it be just like today?" William put his hand on George's shoulder. "Very similar, but that's a long way off. We don't need to think about that now." Finally, it was their turn to leave. An official in a black suit came to guide them. The family lined up, with William and Kate in front and the children behind them. They would walk down the aisle, where everyone could see them. "Remember to wave to the people outside," Kate reminded the children. "There will be many cameras." They began to walk. The red carpet felt soft under their feet. People who were still inside the abbey bowed their heads as the Wales family passed. These were mostly helpers and church workers who had to stay until the end. When they reached the big doors of the abbey, bright sunlight hit their faces. The rain from earlier was gone. The sky was blue now. It seemed like even the weather was celebrating the new king. Outside, huge crowds were waiting. When people saw William, Kate, and the children, they cheered loudly. The noise was like thunder. Louis covered his ears for a moment, surprised by how loud it was. "Wave," Kate reminded him gently. All three children waved to the crowds. Charlotte did a perfect princess wave, moving her hand slowly from side to side. Louis waved with his whole arm, making people laugh. George waved too, but more seriously, like his father. Many people took pictures. Cameras flashed everywhere. TV cameras followed the family as they walked down the steps of the abbey. At the bottom of the steps, more black cars waited. These would take them to Buckingham Palace for the next part of the day. Before they got into their car, William stopped. He wanted his family to stand together for a moment. This was an important picture for history. The future king and his family on this special day. They stood in a line. William, Kate, George, Charlotte, and Louis. They smiled for the cameras. The sun made Kate's diamonds sparkle. The gold buttons on William's uniform shined. "You all did wonderfully," William told his family when the cameras couldn't hear. "I'm very proud." Louis tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can I take off this itchy collar now?" he asked. The others laughed. Even on this most formal day, Louis was still just a normal little boy. They got into their car. As they drove away from Westminster Abbey, the children looked back at the big old church. "That's where grandfather became king," Charlotte said. "And where daddy will become king someday," George added. Kate and William exchanged a look. Their children were growing up in such a special family. Days like today helped them understand their place in history. The car moved through London streets. People were still celebrating everywhere. Flags hung from buildings. Music played in some places. The whole city was having a party for the new king. Inside the car, the Wales family relaxed a little. The most important part of the day was done. Now they were going to Buckingham Palace, where they would appear on the famous balcony with King Charles and Queen Camilla. William looked at his watch. It was just past 1:00 p.m. The day was only half over. There was still much more to do. The royal car drove through the streets of London. People lined both sides of the road, waving flags and cheering. Some people had camped out all night to get a good spot. They wanted to see the new king and his family on this big day. Inside the car, the Wales family watched the happy crowds through the windows. Louis waved back at people even though they couldn't see him through the dark glass of the car. "Look at all the flags," Charlotte said, pointing to buildings where big British flags hung. The car turned onto the Mall, the wide road that leads to Buckingham Palace. Here, the crowds were even bigger. Red, white, and blue decorations were everywhere. Some people wore funny hats or face paint in the same colors. "Almost there," William said. In the distance, they could see Buckingham Palace. It looked grand with its cream-colored walls and many windows. This huge building was the king's main home in London. As they got closer, they saw soldiers in red coats and tall black fur hats standing in perfect lines. These soldiers are called the Queen's Guard, though now they would be the King's Guard. They stood very still, like statues. The car drove through the big gates of the palace. Inside was a large open space called the courtyard. Other cars were arriving too, bringing the important guests from the abbey. When their car stopped, helpers opened the doors. The family stepped out into the courtyard. Other royal family members were already there, talking in small groups. "Can we go inside now?" Louis asked. He was hungry and tired from the long morning. "Yes, we'll go in for a little while," Kate said. "But remember, we have to stand on the balcony later." They walked up the steps and into Buckingham Palace. Inside, the halls were wide and grand. Beautiful paintings hung on the walls. Soft red carpets covered the floors. Everything looked clean and shiny. Palace workers in special uniforms bowed as the family passed. These workers had been very busy getting ready for this day. Some had worked all night to make sure everything was perfect. The family went to a large room where food was set out on long tables. This was not the main meal of the day, but a light lunch to keep everyone going. There were small sandwiches, cakes, and fruit. Finally, Louis said when he saw the food, Kate helped him fill a small plate with things he liked. William was greeted by other members of the royal family. They talked about how well the ceremony had gone. Some people had tears in their eyes. They had all lived through a big moment in history together. George and Charlotte stayed close to their parents. They were used to family gatherings, but today felt different. Everyone was dressed in their best clothes. The adults all seemed extra happy, but also serious. "When will grandfather get here?" Charlotte asked, looking around for the king. "He'll be here soon," William explained. "He has to change his clothes first. The crown and robes are very heavy." While they waited, they could hear music outside. Bands were playing for the crowds. The sound of cheering came through the windows. A palace worker came up to William. "Your Royal Highness, you and your family should start preparing for the balcony appearance. His Majesty will be ready in 20 minutes. William nodded and gathered his family. They went to a special room near the famous balcony. This room had tall windows and gold furniture. It was where the royal family waited before going out to wave to the people. Kate helped the children tidy themselves up. She fixed Charlotte's hair and straightened George's collar. Louis had a smudge of chocolate on his face from a cake he had eaten. Kate wiped it off with a small cloth she kept in her purse. "Now remember," William told the children, "when we go outside, people will cheer very loudly. We will stand with grandfather and grandmother Camilla. We will wave for a few minutes, then come back inside." "Will there be airplanes?" George asked. He loved planes and knew that sometimes there were special airplane shows for big royal events. "Yes, there will be a flypast," William confirmed. "The Royal Air Force planes will fly over the palace at the end." Through the windows, they could see that the sky was still blue. It was a perfect day for watching planes. The sun made the gold statue on top of the palace shine brightly. They heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone important was coming. The door opened. King Charles walked in. He was not wearing the heavy crown or robes anymore. Now he had on a simpler crown called the Imperial State Crown. It was still very fancy, with many jewels, but not as heavy as the first crown. He wore a purple robe over his uniform. Queen Camilla came in with him. She also wore a smaller crown and a white dress. They both looked happy but tired from the long ceremony. "Grandfather," Louis called out. He forgot the rules for a moment and ran to the king. King Charles smiled. Even on this most important day of his life, he was still a grandfather. He bent down slightly to greet his youngest grandson. "Hello there, young man," the king said. "You behaved very well today." Louis beamed with pride. The other children came forward too. Charlotte did a perfect curtsy. George bowed properly, just as he had practiced. "You all did splendidly," King Charles told them. The whole ceremony went just as it should. William and Kate also greeted the king and queen. There were no bows or curtsies now. This was a private family moment before they went out to face the public again. A palace worker came in. "Your Majesty, the crowds are ready. The balcony appearance should begin in 5 minutes." King Charles nodded. "Very well." The family stood together near the tall glass doors that led to the balcony. Through the glass, they could see the huge crowd in front of the palace. The mall was filled with people as far as they could see. "That's a lot of people," George said quietly. He sounded a little nervous. "They're all here to celebrate with grandfather," William explained. "It's a happy day for the whole country." Louis was trying to peek through the curtains. "I can't see," he complained. Kate picked him up so he could look out. His eyes went wide when he saw all the people waiting. A clock chimed 3 times. It was 3:00 p.m., time for the balcony appearance. Palace workers opened the glass doors. The sound of the crowd got much louder. It was like the roar of the ocean. King Charles and Queen Camilla went out first. The crowd cheered even louder when they saw the new king. He raised his hand to wave, and the people waved back with their small flags. Then William and Kate stepped out with their children. They stood in a line on the balcony. The red stone walls of the palace were behind them. Below was the huge crowd filling the street and the park beyond. Louis's mouth opened in surprise at the noise. Charlotte waved like she had practiced. George stood tall like his father. The family waved to the people. Cameras took thousands of pictures. This was the moment that would be on the front page of newspapers all over the world the next day. Wave to the people, Kate reminded Louis, who was staring in wonder. He started to wave with big arm movements. The crowd loved it and cheered more. Some people even laughed at his enthusiasm. For 10 minutes, the royal family stood on the balcony. They waved and smiled. Below them, people sang "God Save the King," the country's special song. Some people had tears in their eyes as they sang. Then they heard a sound in the distance. It was the planes coming. The Royal Air Force was doing a special show called a flypast. "Look," William pointed to the sky. Everyone on the balcony looked up. First came helicopters, flying low and slow. Then came larger planes in perfect formation. They flew right over Buckingham Palace. The best part came last. The Red Arrows, special planes that can make colored smoke, flew over. They made red, white, and blue smoke trails across the sky, the colors of the British flag. Louis clapped his hands in excitement. "Wow!" he shouted, loud enough for people nearby to hear. His honest joy made many people smile. As the last planes disappeared, King Charles looked at his family. They had all done their part today. The ceremony was over. He was now truly the king, with his family beside him. William caught his father's eye. They shared a look that said many things without words. It was about duty, family, and the future. One day, William would stand where his father stood now, and after him, George would have his turn. But that was for another day, far in the future. Today was for King Charles. The royal family waved one last time to the crowds. Then they turned and walked back inside the palace, leaving the balcony empty. The coronation day was not over yet. There would be more celebrations, but the most important parts were done. History had been made, and the Wales family had been right there, in the middle of it all.